It's time to get petty, guys, and talk about my worst and least favorite and most disappointing books of 2023. I tend to not try to go toward books that I know that I will hate, but sometimes I do persevere longer than I should, and as a result I have some books that I dislike or hate or think are rubbish, and some of them I'm just being petty about. Some of them I know that they aren't bad books, but I don't like them, so I'm going to tell you guys about them. At the beginning, I'm going to briefly talk about some of the books that I DNF'd. Some of them I hated, some of them I didn't hate them, but I DNF'd all of them. The first one is Post-Colonial Love Poem. This is a poetry collection that I was reading. I was not enjoying it, it's just a different kind of poetry that I don't always love, and I always meant to go back to it, and I know now I'm not going to go back to it. Similarly, we have Time as a Mother by Ocean Vuong. He is a beloved of booktube and around the world. I read his first poetry collection and I never got on with it, and I started this one with the full intention, got about 50% off, again, was out of my poetry mood, and then was like, no, I really don't want to go back to this book, so I'm not going to. This is making me really look like I hate poetry, but I think I'm just very much more particular about poetry than anything else, and I tend to read it physically, which a lot of other books, if I'm listening to them on audiobook, I can like persevere. Crow by Ted Hughes. This was just not it, you know? I wanted to understand this because Ted Hughes was the husband of Sylvia Plath, and he also lost his second wife as well to suicide. And this is supposed to be about grief and all of these elements, and it would later come into play in other people's literature, like Grief is a Thing with Feathers, and I wanted to understand the groundwork for this. So I persevered for such a long time, and I hated it. And I read it to my other friends, and they were like, I don't know why you're still reading this. It is very philosophical poetry, which is just not the vibe that I'm going to do. If I want to read like very like technically big words, I'm not going to go to poetry for that. Two Jane Austen books that I DNF'd were Lawnborn by Jo Baker. I did not like this. It's very 2010, I'm not like other girls, and oh, there's a man, and I was like, no, this is not what I'm going for. And then I also DNF'd The Clergyman's Wife by Molly Greeley. I had read her previous book, The Heiress, and hated it, so I tried this one. It was about Charlotte. I did not like it. I also DNF'd Oryx and Craigs by Margaret Atwood. It felt very male gazy-ish, and I like Margaret Atwood. I read a bunch of her books. This one was just not the time and space. I might go back to it because it's Margaret Atwood, otherwise I probably wouldn't. The next book that I DNF'd is another book that is a book that I didn't DNF because it was bad, but it's called Unlikable Female Characters, and it just felt very much like a retread. It was quite a long book, and I read I think 30 or 40% of it, and I was like, I'm not learning anything new. I hope that other people who want to like have an introductory conversation about women and how they're represented in pop culture would love this. I want to read other things right now. And then I also DNF'd 3 books that were darlings of booktube in 2023. Chain Gang All Stars. This was just not for me. I really like character development and like understanding where things are coming from, and this was like drop in the action, various things happening, no explanation, and that's just not the vibe that I want ever. And then also Northwoods. This just turned me the other way. A lot of people loved it. I not only read a bunch of the beginning, I also flipped through and read various time frames because this is a book that takes place over like 150 years, and I did not like any of them. And some of the conversations in those snippets that were talking about mental health or other things, I was like, no, I'm really glad I did not waste my time on this. And then I also DNF'd Y/N. This was popular in many things, and I know that some of it got negative feedback, and I was like, no, I'm gonna love this. I did not love it. And then I also DNF'd Where the Sidewalk Ends. He also wrote The Giving Tree, which I read this year and liked. And this was just very plotless, and a lot of it was foolhardy and stuff, and I think I read over 100 and some pages. And I was like, I am just trying to go through this because I don't want to DNF this book. And it's a fine book. I would read it to children. It just doesn't feel like a book I should read from cover to cover, and I didn't want to continue on. The book that I didn't hate but I was definitely disappointed in was Sunshine Nails by May Nugent. And this is about a family of Vietnamese immigrants and first and second generation. I was so excited because I live in Canada. I live really close to where this takes place. And I was like, I was so gung-ho for this book. And I think that it fell curse to a debut not being brilliant, and it had 5 point of views, and it just felt like we never got that deep into the characters, and I never felt fully enmeshed in the ways that I wanted to, so I ended up quite disappointed. I originally didn't rate it because I didn't want to bring down her average rating, and yet Goodreads automatically rated it for me, and I was like, well, now I can't erase this. So another book that I'm just salty about, it's not bad, I just didn't like it, was Electra. I previously read Ariadne by her and really loved it, and I plan to read her books in the future. I just didn't like Electra, and I liked the other female characters in it, and I was just frustrated by Electra, and I was like, I don't want to spend time with you at all. Can you please move on? So I ended up just frustrated and irritated and bored, and I know that it wasn't because of her writing, but I just was not happy. The next 2 books are disappointments, are also poetry collections that I just did not like. I really like poetry, and this is making it seem like I really don't, but we have Lunch Poems by Frank O'Hara, as well as New Hampshire by Robert Frost. And both of these include like really famous things. I thought Love Poems included Having Coke with Me, which I have read and enjoyed. And New Hampshire included Fire and Ice as well as A Road Not Taken. And I really enjoyed those poems. I know that Frank O'Hara is a very avant-garde poet who doesn't always write poetry in the way that you want to be poetry. He's just very like commonplace. And there's also just some racist stuff that I was like, that has not aged well. And in New Hampshire, it's the kind of poetry that I don't like. Like I like very lyrical, very reflective poetry, and some of his poems I just liked, but a lot of them, they were just too wordy in weird places that I was just like, nah, not me. Another book that I'm just salty about is Femina. I know that it is like really well loved and really beloved, and I just didn't like it. I think this was primarily narrative voice. I thought some of the information was really cool and really interesting, and I couldn't get behind it. I also thought that it was a little misleading because it talked about how like, you know, early Middle Ages, and then it focused primarily on Britain and a little bit of Poland. And I did learn things, but I was just like, why are we only talking about like Black people in the comparison to their experience of being in England in like 1100? Like why is that the narrative? Like you didn't actually specify that this was only going to be Europe. Women actually had more agency in other countries that weren't Europe. And it's just, it deeply frustrated on that aspect as well. I know that this is not the overarching opinion, so I have a few classics on here, which is always disappointing because I love classics. But we have Walden. I was anticipating this book because I previously read Civil Disobedience by the same author and really liked it. And this was trash. Not only because of the fact that some of it was really boring, it also really perpetuates the idea that self-reliance is the only way. And this was the huge overarching belief in this movement. He was a student of Emerson who wrote this whole essay about self-reliance. The problem with self-reliance is not only that it perpetuates the idea that we can be independent from others, which is impossible. Even Thoreau with his lake and the island, it was granted to him by Emerson. Like, he didn't even get this land himself. He was like, yes, I bought this land from a friend on a good price, and you like have your wealth and your background. It also excuses us from the responsibility of caring for those who cannot care for themselves. It excludes people who have not had the chances you have, who do not have the like ability economically to, and people who physically can't because of disabilities. And I think as someone who has a disability, it's very hard for me to read this book and to know the ways in which social programs and other things have been set up on the idea that everyone should be independent and everyone should be 100% able to take care of themselves. And if not, we will grill you to the point of embarrassment and ridicule to make sure that you don't actually get anything that you don't deserve. And I think that a lot of this idea of self-reliance and independence is created in really influential essays like this. And I don't think that even if self-reliance was possible, that would be the best possible way. We don't want to live in a world in which we are not interconnected, in which we don't care for the people who need help. And that doesn't even just apply to people who absolutely need help to get by. It's also like, even if you can get by on your own, like, do you want that life? Like, even if you're an introvert, even if you like are a homebody, like there's a difference between not wanting to be around people all the time and like choosing to like live a life that says, I don't want people in it. It also has this overarching way of like looking to the past and looking to nature as like, you know, the source and the beauty of all of those things. And he was talking about like how people pretty much shouldn't go to school because they could just build their own houses. And I think that that's all rooted in the rhetoric of make America great again, like go back to the time when things were simpler and everything was good. And I just think that that's a really destructive narrative that I really don't like. I went into the expectation that Walden was going to be amazing and reflective and all of those things, and I thought some of the writing was good. A lot of it was mediocre and boring, and it really perpetuates harmful narratives that drove me up the wall. Another classic that I really struggled with was Carmela, and this is one of the first vampire stories. I really liked the beginning of this because we have, you know, this rural kind of setting in probably Eastern Europe, and we have this girl who like lives in this castle kind of by herself, and then we have run her a carriage, and this woman named Carmela is here, and you know, she just needs to be left, and then her mom just leaves her with no further conversation. I just love 1800s hospitality being like, yes, random girl, she looks noble, she can come live with us, we don't know her name or any information about her. One of the recurrent things that I thought was really interesting was that she said that I wouldn't have been as prey to this if I hadn't been so lonely, but because of our main character being very, very lonely and isolated, she wants so much to be in relationships and friendships that she allows like abusive and strange things to just pass her by. But generally this book was just so undeveloped, and I love Dracula, so I am partial to the reading of that story, but I just know how much you feel and how much you understand these characters, and this book just felt like it was a skimmer notes, and I know that it preceded it and all of those things. think that it didn't have any weight for me in a story, and there was one flashback to a ball that I thought was great, and the rest of it was so boring. Another classic that I read and had mixed feelings about was Stylus Marner, and I think that if the last 10% of the book had been the book, that would have been great. Also, the last 10% of the book is what is presented on most back covers and summaries of this book, and I just don't understand. And we have this guy who goes from a person who is a religious dissenter and has like religion as this whole thing, and then he gets falsely accused and he ends up living as a miser, just like collecting all of his money. And then in the last 10% of the novel, he has a change of heart. And none of those are really dived into any complexity or depth. And it just really feels like George Eliot is trying to say philosophical information and like less about actual characters. And other people may argue with me. I just felt like it was really shallow, and I think as a person of religious background, I just really struggled with the idea that like he would go from religion being to everything to being nothing to just, in this case, just being like, yeah, sure, I'll do it if that's what's best. Like, it just felt like very like, I feel like people think about religion more than that. I was trying not to spoil earlier, but I am, because I can't talk about this aspect without it. So pretty much there's this rich dude, and he has a secret wife, and he has abandoned her. And this woman has now become addicted to opium. She is living in squalor. She's living without like basic needs. And meanwhile, this squire is trying to get engaged to a lovely young woman. And we follow this woman who is like trying to like make her way to her husband to keep him from like abandoning her. And she's villainized. And it's like literally talking about how like, you know, she did it to herself. And it's just like addiction, I think, is just really complex as a theme. And also, like, she's a poor woman who was taken advantage by a rich man and then abandoned and never spoken of. And the fact that she wants recognition from his father that she is his rightful wife, like, that is not being manipulative. That is not being all of those things. But the way that it casts that just, it was a stone in my chest. I was like, no. The quote that really killed me was, "Her husband would be smiling and smiling upon, hiding her existence in the darkest corners of his heart." And that is not sentimentally said. That is said like as if she's vindictive. And I'm like, yeah, he's smiling and being smiled upon and like hiding her. Like, does no one else see the issues with this? And I can look back at books that were written in the 1850s and be like, okay, yeah. But I also just really didn't enjoy the writing or characters or anything else about the book. So the negative elements just... Another classic that I was disappointed in was A Lost Lady. This book came out in 1923, so it turned 100 years last year. That's why I read it. And it apparently maybe inspired The Great Gatsby. And it is a book that is looking back at the past and thinking about what could be. And I have previously liked Willa Cather's books, but this felt like it was all the themes and like, you know, elements of like, a lostness, like as if Daisy Buchanan was like the main character. It's just like these boys looking at this woman and then like growing to like revile her. And that's just not a narrative that I love, and I also just was not engaged with it as well. Our next section is books that are a little bit more modern and that I did not like at all. First away, we're gonna have the low-hanging fruit of Away from the Dead. This was a book that was longlisted for the Giller Prize. I read it because of that. I did not like it. It's set in Russia during World War I and the Bolsheviks and stuff, I believe, and it follows various people, including Mennonite people in that era. I did not think that this had a lot of depth. The last line of Away from the Dead and Toward the Living I thought was a great line, but in general, it was a book that I just did not think was very memorable. Another Canadian book that I read and hoped to love was You Are Eating an Orange, You Are Naked. This book looks at young translator and his girlfriend, and they tell stories of mythological origins and they travel the world. There was elements that I could like about it, but I didn't like some of like the sexualization, inhumanly cool girlfriend. They were together in Hong Kong, I believe, and they are supposed to be having a dinner reservation, and she never comes, and he's just like eating alone, and then he calls her and she answers drunk in Macau with a bunch of friends and is like, yep, I left. And then we follow this like long time in which he just goes really, really drunk and gets on a ferry and then ends up there and they make up. It feels very autofiction-y. And even at the end, he's addressing the fact that, you know, they are now broken up. We kind of know that from the beginning because it talks about her walking out. And then we have him thinking about how he's going to publish this book about her, despite the fact that she is in so much of the book. We like never see a deeper lens of it. It is so much in his narrative. We're looking at this person he adores and who everyone else adores, and we never really see much of a like crack in anything about her. And I think that that's just so empty, and I especially don't love when male writers write female characters with like nothing about them, and you know, they're just cool, and it's not a narrative that I love, and it wasn't actually like addressed at all. So that just put a bad taste in my mouth as well. I'm laughing because I almost don't want to talk about it. We know my most hated book of the year. I don't know if it's my most hated book. I don't know. Demon Copperhead. Everyone hates it. I hate this book. I have a review about it that goes into extenuous detail, and it is one of the most popular videos on my channel. I will leave it below. You will find it and you will know all my thoughts. I did not hate this book. I just didn't love it. It didn't have the magic for me, and I think that part of it is honestly that I don't understand why it as a book is like getting shouted out. And I know that that is so petty. It's a run-of-the-mill book, you know. It could have been a 2-star book, and then it's just so praised. And I'm like, there's so many other books that deal with addiction and deal with so many of these aspects so much better. No shade to Barbara Kingsolver at all. I think she's a great author. I want to read more of her. But this book just did not do it for me. And then also all of the shade that Trust got, and Trust is one of my favorite books of 2022, but everyone was like, it's not worthy of Demon Copperhead. And I'm like, why? I also really hated the way that she just ruined all of Dickens' characters. I didn't even think that I liked David Copperfield that much. Like, I was like, it's a run-of-the-mill book. And then I read a book that butchered everything that I liked about that book, and I went, no. So this is just adaptational hate, but yeah, not a big fan. Another book that I disliked with my whole heart was The Dog in the North, and I also have a rant about this in my Women's Prize video that I will link below. And I mostly just don't like gritty, dirty, nihilistic books. And this falls into it. This is personal, I would say, but also it just doesn't, the humor doesn't work for me. And I think that if the humor works for you, you're probably golden. It doesn't for me. And it just really likes rats and urine and body stuff. And if you know anything about me, I don't like reading about those things. I'm a person who has a big issue with dirt. I, you know, have cracked hands all the time because I repetitively clean my hands. So I know that like a part of this is just like, it's triggering for me to like read about all of these things, but it was also just not necessary. It's just like, I think that you can live in the world realistically and also just not talk about gross things and like have gross things everywhere and then think about how gross they could be all the time. Not my vibe. And yeah, also, we talk about sexual abuse, we talk about all of these elements, and they're never addressed. Like, we just have moments where, like, these characters go through traumatic things and we don't process it. And I'm not big into books about hard issues where there is no processing. And then also the book ends with no solutions. We end up with her just driving places with no answers. Like, the major concerns and, like, thoughts about this book, we don't know what happens. Is this person a criminal? Is this person not? Will any of this happen? We don't know. We have no idea. I've become more generous with my rating over the years, but this was like a solid 1 star. I was like, nope. And then the last book on here, I don't have that many thoughts on it. It's Fraud by Zadie Smith. I had big hopes. This was my first book by her. I will try her again, but this just did not do it for me. I read it all in one sitting because I knew that if I stopped, I would not finish it. I would DNF it so fast. And I was like, I shall persevere. And yeah, I think elements of it could have been interesting, and it just didn't do it for me. It didn't engage me. I'm not a big fan of cousins having sexual relationships. I'm also like, I would have loved to talk more about Jamaica and like those elements of the book that just I felt like got glossed over. I know the cousins thing is not the fault of Smith. That is pretty established narratively, but like, did we have to be so explicit about cousins having sex? It was not for me. And then yeah, like I really wanted it to be more representative of Jamaica and like conversations about that, about more of the literary world. We focus a lot on the Tichborne case as a case that I know a lot about, and yeah, I don't know. I just didn't feel grounded in this book. I feel like outside of a few exceptions, my most issue is that I just didn't like it. I didn't get along with it. It didn't work for me. I wish I was more cohesive in my anger. I have been more cohesive in my anger in previous books, but I feel like none of these books I picked up because I tried to not pick up books that I thought I would hate. So like a lot of these I'm just like disappointed in and being like, why? Rather than white hot rage, we just have a nope, not for me. I hope you have a grand day. I hope that your day is better than any of these books. I would love to hear your hot takes about what you didn't like in 2023, and I will see you soon.